Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word. The
gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
The gentleman from Virginia's amendment would add $30 million to the National Science Foundation operations and management budget while offering no offset to pay for the increase. H.R. 1806 is fiscally responsible while being pro-science, cutting or freezing spending in some areas to target new funding for areas of basic research with the greatest potential for breakthroughs to create new industries and U.S. jobs. This bill freezes agency operations and management at last year's funding level in order to invest more money in basic research grants, which are the engine for keeping America innovative, competitive, and economically strong. I believe that NSF can find ways to streamline operations and administer expenses in order to fund additional grants. This bill responsibly manages to fund over 3,000 additional grants in biology and the physical sciences. Would you cut any of them to pay for the increase? This amendment fails to make the difficult decisions necessary to be fiscally responsible, as did the President's budget request that ignored the Budget Control Act. Members should protect the American taxpayer and future generations from more debt and vote against this amendment. Now, I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I much appreciate the gentlewoman from Connecticut's concern for industrial technology. I believe it is critical to manufacturing and to our economy. But, however, I must oppose this amendment because H.R. 1806 maintains a responsible level of funding at $130 million for the ITS account at NIST. This amendment would raise the ITS services account funding by $5 million without an offset. As my colleagues have mentioned, we make difficult choices in this bill to adhere to the Budget Control Act mandates and maintain a deficit-neutral position overall. The Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program helps small and medium manufacturers connect to tools, technology, and best practices. This bill changes the current cost share requirements to encourage smaller manufacturers to use MEP services. In making this change, NIST has assured us this change will result in more assistance to small manufacturing companies within the funding parameters. Our bill also authorizes $5 million from the ITS account for NIST to administer the Network for Manufacturing Innovation, or NMI. Last year, and with strong bipartisan support, this committee approved legislation, the Revitalizing American Manufacturing Innovation Act, which authorized the NMI. That legislation, which was signed into law late last year, authorized $5 million per year for 10 years for NIST to manage the competitive aspects of the NMI program. Funding the NMI centers was authorized to be transferred from Department of Energy advanced manufacturing monies up to $250 million over 10 years. To fund the network at the President's request would not only be fiscally irresponsible, but also contrary to recent law. For these reasons, I cannot support the amendment, and I ask my colleagues to join me in opposition. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, although this is a simple amendment with no financial impact, it does have big consequences. This amendment would incorporate new language into the DOE's Office of Science mission that would direct DOE to study the extent to which human activity impacts climate change. This amendment would fundamentally change the mission of the DOE's Office of Science. It would require the Office of Science to pursue the administration's agenda of politicized climate change initiatives rather than conducting non-political basic research. I oppose the gentleman's amendment because it is overly prescriptive and intrusive. The Office of Science conducts discovery science and would not benefit from Congress incorporating statutory conclusions about climate change into the direction of its research in atmospheric and environmental science. For these reasons, I encourage members of the committee to oppose the amendment at the desk. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would remove important measures that ensure greater transparency for the federal government's climate science initiatives and require accountability for the Office of Science to justify the value of related work going forward. The provision included in the bill does not ban any particular area of science, but instead requires that DOE justify the scientific merit and provide greater transparency if climate science work is intentionally duplicated. The administration has unapologetically pushed forward a politicized climate agenda that has become pervasive throughout the federal government. The competes accountability measures are good policy, which this amendment seeks to strike. For that reason, I oppose the amendment and encourage my colleagues to do the same. I yield back.